The first punch landed so hard that the entire restaurant fell silent. Chairs scraped against the tiled floor. A glass shattered somewhere near the counter. For a split second, it felt like the world had frozen in broad daylight, like time itself was holding its breath. In the middle of the lunch crowd, beneath the soft yellow glow of hanging lamps and the chatter of families enjoying their meals, a woman stumbled backward as two men towered over her, rage twisting their faces. And then, before anyone could react, a tall man from the corner table stood up. He didn't look like a hero. He looked tired, ordinary, just another customer finishing his meal with his young daughter. But within seconds, everything changed. If you believe that kindness, courage, and second chances still exist in this world, take a moment right now to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel and stories. Because stories like this remind us that quiet heroes walk among us every day. It was just after 1 p.m. at Harborview Grill, a small family-owned restaurant overlooking the marina. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, glinting off the water outside. People were laughing, waitresses were moving quickly between tables, and the smell of grilled sandwiches and fresh coffee filled the air. Marcus Hale sat near the window with his 6-year-old daughter. Her legs swung gently beneath the booth as she carefully dipped fries into ketchup, concentrating like it was the most important mission in the world. Marcus watched her with soft eyes, his large hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Life hadn't been easy since Sophie's mother passed away 3 years earlier. Grief had hit him like a rogue wave, dragging him under when he thought he was strong enough to swim. He had left the service shortly before that, trading deployments for bedtime stories, uniforms for school pickups. Being both mother and father to Sophie meant long nights, packed schedules, and a constant ache in his chest that never fully disappeared. But he never complained. Sophie was his anchor. At the center of the restaurant, near the entrance, a young woman named Aria Bennett was finishing her shift. She had moved to the city 2 months ago, hoping for a fresh start after leaving a toxic relationship behind in another state. She carried herself carefully, as if the world might shatter if she stepped too hard. That day she wore a simple summer dress and tied her hair back in a loose ponytail, trying to look invisible. But invisibility wasn't granted to her. The two men who stormed through the doors were impossible to ignore. Loud, aggressive. Their boots struck the tile with purpose. They scanned the room and locked onto Aria instantly. Several customers recognized the tension. The way her shoulders stiffened. The way her face drained of color. One of the men grabbed her wrist before she could step back, his fingers digging into her skin. Words were exchanged in harsh whispers that quickly turned into raised voices. Accusations. Threats. The manager hesitated behind the counter. Other patrons looked down at their plates. It was broad daylight, but fear has a way of dimming everything. Marcus saw it all in the reflection of the window. At first, he stayed seated. He had learned discipline. He had learned control. He told himself it wasn't his business, that someone else would intervene. Then he saw Sophie watching. Her small eyes were wide, confused, afraid. And that was when Marcus stood. He didn't rush in recklessly. He moved with quiet precision, placing a hand on Sophie's shoulder and telling her softly to stay in the booth. His voice was steady, but something deep within him had already shifted. When he reached the group, one of the men shoved Aria hard enough that she nearly fell. The other raised his fist. Marcus stepped between them without hesitation. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply placed himself there, a wall of calm strength. He told them to let her go. The men laughed at first. They saw a man in jeans and a plain white t-shirt, a single dad interrupting something that wasn't his concern. They pushed him, and that was their mistake. The first attacker swung wildly. Marcus moved with a speed that felt almost unreal. He deflected the punch, grabbed the man's arm, and used his own momentum to bring him down hard onto the floor. Gasps echoed through the restaurant. The second lunged forward, anger turning reckless, Marcus pivoted, controlled the strike, and forced him backward against a booth, pinning him just long enough to disarm the situation. His movements were clean, efficient, not fueled by rage, but by training. Within less than a minute, both men were on the ground, stunned and restrained, until staff called the police. The entire restaurant stared. Arya trembled, clutching her arm. Marcus stepped back immediately, giving her space, checking quickly that she wasn't injured. He kept his tone gentle, asking if she was okay. 5 minutes later, as police officers arrived and began taking statements, one of them paused mid-sentence when he looked at Marcus more closely. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He addressed him not casually, but with respect. It turned out Marcus Hale had spent over a decade in the Navy. Not behind a desk, not on safe assignments. He had served in some of the most intense operations overseas, earning commendations he never spoke about. He had led teams through chaos and brought them home alive. Discipline, courage, and control were carved into his bones. The murmurs in the restaurant shifted. People who had remained silent moments earlier now looked at him differently, with admiration, with shame. But Marcus didn't bask in attention. He returned to his booth, knelt down in front of Sophie, and smiled like nothing extraordinary had happened. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, and asked if she was still hungry. Sophie threw her arms around his neck. Arya watched from across the room, tears slipping down her cheeks, not just from fear, but from relief. For the first time in months, someone had stepped in. Someone had chosen to stand up. In the days that followed, the story quietly spread through the community, not because Marcus wanted it to, but because people had recorded parts of the incident on their phones. Local news picked it up. Customers praised his bravery. The restaurant offered free meals for life. Marcus declined interviews. He had protected someone because it was right, not because it would be seen. But something unexpected began to change inside him. For years he had lived in survival mode, focused only on providing for Sophie, avoiding attention, avoiding reminders of his past life in uniform. That afternoon reminded him that strength didn't disappear when you left the service. It evolved. It redirected. Arya reached out a week later to thank him properly. She brought a small handmade drawing from Sophie that she had framed. Sophie had drawn her father standing like a superhero. Arya's hand still shook slightly when she spoke, but her eyes held more confidence. She told Marcus that his intervention had given her the courage to file a restraining order and finally close that painful chapter of her life. She told him that seeing someone stand up without hesitation reminded her that not all strength is cruel. Some strength protects. Marcus listened quietly. For Sophie, that day became a lesson she would carry forever. She saw her father not just as the man who packed her lunches and braided her hair awkwardly, but as someone who stood firm when others looked away. The manager at Harbor View Grill began training staff on how to respond to violent situations. Customers spoke more openly about stepping in safely when something felt wrong. Silence no longer felt acceptable, and Marcus began to heal in ways he hadn't expected. He started volunteering at a local youth center, teaching discipline and self-defense classes, not to create fighters, but to build confidence. He discovered that leadership didn't require a battlefield, it required heart. One afternoon, months later, Marcus and Sophie returned to the same restaurant. The sunlight poured in just as it had that day. Arya now worked the front desk, smiling genuinely. She waved at Sophie, who waved back enthusiastically. Life hadn't become perfect. There were still hard nights, still memories that surfaced without warning. But there was also hope. Marcus realized that sometimes, the battles that matter most aren't overseas. In everyday places. In moments when we choose whether to look away or stand up. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it. Your engagement helps stories of courage and kindness reach more people who may need a reminder that good still exists in this world. And before we close, I want to ask you something special. Comment the word courage below if you believe one person's actions can change someone else's life forever. Because on an ordinary sunny afternoon, a single dad proved that strength isn't about power. It's about protection. It's about choosing to step forward when fear tells you to sit down. 5 minutes after two attackers thought they had found an easy target, they learned something unforgettable. They learned that the quiet man in the white t-shirt wasn't just a father. He was Navy, but more importantly, he was human, and sometimes that's the greatest title of all.